Paper 2, English Language, is Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives, and it's 1 hour and 45 minutes. You'll receive an insert which goes with the exam booklet, and inside the insert you have the extracts which you'll need to use. The main difference between Paper 1 and Paper 2 is that you have 2 extracts and you have 2 comparison questions. When you open your booklet, you'll notice that the first question asks you to shade in true statements from A to H. So you have to pick 4 statements which you think are true. So you need to begin, obviously, by reading source A. Once you've read source A, you can then answer question 1, shade in the correct statements, make sure that you don't spend much time on this question because it's only worth 4 marks. It asks you to look between lines 1 to 21, so when you're shading it might be an idea to draw a box around that section so you know where you're going to get the information from. Quite quickly then, move on to question 2. So question 2 is a comparison question, which is quite similar to question 4, but the main difference about this question is that it's only worth A marks. So it asks you to refer to source A and source B for this question. Therefore, you then need to read source B as well. Source B is always 19th century fiction, often an extract from a Victorian newspaper or a journal. Sometimes you'll find that the language is quite old-fashioned and archaic, and so lots of the times you do have a glossary, but when you don't, just make sure that you understand the overall ideas and don't choose a quote where you've got a word inside the quote that you don't understand. So question 2 then asks you to look at both, and in this case it asks you to use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences between 2 different places. So it's usually a summary of the differences, not always, but usually. It'll either be differences or similarities. You need to come up with 3 differences. So I've written 3 differences here. Both places experience trauma, both places are polluted, and both places have been shocked by an experience. So you're looking for 3 differences that you can see between source A and B. Then you need to find your evidence. So armed with your highlighter or your pen, you need to look for evidence in source A that both places in this example experience trauma, and then you go and you highlight your evidence in source A and you highlight your evidence in source B. And you do the same for each of your statements. So you then find that you have your statements and you have your evidence. And so the next thing you have to do, once you've found your evidence, is use your 3 differences as paragraphs and write about them. So you want to use these 3 as 3 different sections, 3 different paragraphs, and write about them using your evidence and explaining how they are different within those paragraphs. The main focus is on your comparison. However, it would be beneficial for you to also analyse the language. Not in as much depth as you would with a language question, however, they're still looking for that in your answer. You might find that you only get through 2 and that you can't explain 3 because there's not enough time. That's absolutely fine. As before, you need to be using words like you would in any comparison. Question 3 asks you to refer to language. So it's a very similar question to Paper 1, question 2, in that it's looking for your analysis skills and it's looking for your ability to unpick and to explain the writer's methods and techniques. So, in this question, it asks you to look at only source A, So you go back to source A, so it's slightly simpler really because you don't have to make comparisons. And again, you need to draw a box around the lines that it specifies. So from here we're talking 27 to 40. And it asks you how the writer uses language to describe the coal tips. So it's worth 12 marks because the paper goes up in terms of how much the questions are worth. So you're looking for 3 quotes that you feel are meaty enough to analyse in depth. So have a little look, go through, find your quotes, and then you're simply ready to answer. Here's your method: read the question, draw a box around the lines, pick 3 quotes, explore and analyse. So really, question 4 is very similar to question 2 in that it's testing the same skills, except with question 4 you're also looking at method. The writer's method features heavily on the mark scheme. So it's asking you again to look at the whole of source A together with the whole of source B, and it will give you a focus. So in this question it asks you to compare how the writers convey their different ideas and perspectives of the events that they describe. And it gives you some clues and hints comparing different ideas, different methods and different references to both texts. It's worth 16 marks, so it's worth quite a substantial amount on the paper. So you need to read the question, 3 techniques which both sources use. And so this, if you compare the techniques rather than make statements like you did in question 2, you find that you do hit the success criteria naturally, and it focuses you much easier. So what we've got here, both use imagery. Imagery is a great one to use because, like I've said in other videos before, both of the sources will use imagery, so it's a safe one and one that you can use again and again. Both use descriptive language and both use powerful verbs. And then once you've got your 3 techniques that they both use, you then need to find your evidence in both as before. So you need to get your highlighter out and find some of these things, match them. So both use imagery, so I'll be looking for my imagery in source A. I'll be looking for my imagery in source B. And the same goes for descriptive language and powerful verbs. So if I feel the need, I might then annotate also what I think this is trying to show here and what the effect is of these particular words and images. Then you simply start to compare using these ideas, and you are looking to write approximately 2 sides of A4 because it's worth 16 marks. So really try to do all 3 paragraphs. Again, if you don't get that opportunity because you've written so much, then that could be just as worthwhile. It's quality over quantity all the way. Section B, the writing section of paper 2, you're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. So you will be given a statement that someone has said, and then you have to then respond to that statement. So for example, this one is saying, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes and landslides. We see more and more reports of environmental disasters affecting the world and its people every day. Write the text of a speech for a debate at your school or college in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility for protecting the environment. Now, the form that you'll be asked to write could be a speech, it could be a newspaper article, it could be a letter, and your marks off 40 marks that is available for this question, but it's divided into 24 marks for content and 16 for your technical accuracy. So that's an awful lot of marks. So it's really important that you pay a lot of attention to this question and really think about it before you start. So here, we've got the 40 marks that's broken down the 24 content, and the 16 is the spelling, punctuation and organisation. So what you say and how you say it will come under the 24 mark bracket. So you'll be assessed for that out of 24. You will then be assessed for your spelling, punctuation and grammar out of 16, but also your organisation of your answer as well. So looking down the success criteria, these are the things that your answer should have. These are the things the examiner is going to be looking for. So you've got powerful vocabulary, we've got devices. So by devices, we mean things such as rhetorical questions, rule of three, short and long sentences, similes, metaphors, addressing the audience. Structure is one of the most important things. It's really important that you plan your answer out before you start writing it. The examiner is going to be looking for your answer to have a link at the beginning and the end together. So the best answers are the ones where perhaps the title of your piece, if it's a newspaper article, links to the last line of your article. So it's as though you've consciously crafted it, you've thought it through, and you haven't just started to write it. And it's linked to paragraphs because obviously paragraphs is part of structure, but it's something that's really important that you remember, because without paragraphs, your writing just seems really disorganised. And if you're disorganised, then you'll be hit not only in the content, but in the organisation marks as well. So it's really, really important that you do plan it, which I'll show you how to do in a minute. And then we've got spelling, punctuation and grammar. The other thing that's really important with this question, which is very different really to the creative writing question, is that when in your paper 1 answer for creative writing, when you describe something, you're automatically very aware of your purpose, and your audience isn't really something you need to worry about that much because it comes naturally. Whereas if you're writing the speech or a letter, that the purpose and the audience are the most important things. If you are too informal, or if you behave inappropriately in your answer, perhaps if you start threatening your audience, you would lose marks, or you would not have an adequate sense of what the reasoning is behind your writing. And in order for you to show maturity, you need to be fully aware of your purpose and audience. So when you're addressing somebody, so for example, in this answer, it's asking you to write the text of a speech for a debate at your school or college in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility. You can be a young person or you can be an older teen. In lots of the answers, you can be a parent if you like, but you have to maintain that sense of purpose and audience all the way through. You can't lapse, and if it's unclear as to whether you are sure who you are addressing and who you are when you're arguing your case, your argument will start to fall apart. The two most common ways to plan are here. So my first most preferred method and most common method is spider diagram. So you would just write down all of your initial ideas and then place them into paragraphs and organise them, and then simply just start to write about them. Or you could plan out 5 paragraphs, introduction and conclusion, and then your 3 reasons or your 3 main arguments in the middle. So in your introduction, you want to start really strong, really bold, using some devices, perhaps a rhetorical question, and it'll be really, really effective if you then in your conclusion summed it up in an equally powerful way and perhaps used some of the same devices, so it was obvious that you'd consciously decided to make your introduction and conclusion mirror each other. And you need to start in a really, really powerful, positive way, and this will then set the tone for the rest of your answer. Be really, really aware of your purpose and your audience. You should never start with something like, I agree with the statement. If it's going to be a newspaper article, you have to imagine it appearing in a newspaper, and you would never have a newspaper article starting with, I agree with the statement. You need to rethink about how your first sentence is going to interest your reader. 5 paragraphs is obviously a rough guide, and you might find when you start writing about it that actually you find that you say so much that it only ends up being 4 or that it ends up being 6. That's just something that might happen as you go along, and it's absolutely great to adapt as you go along. But it's a good idea to have, like I say, a guide before you start. You should be looking to write approximately 2.5 pages. Remember, it's 40 marks, this question, and so you really want to get as high marks as you can, because it's half of the exam paper. And some people decide they want to start with this question and then go to the reading section. Well, that's up to you, but I would suggest that you make sure that you reread it once you've written it, because you might have missed certain letters or words. You're going to be quite tired at the end of the exam because it's very full on. So just make sure that you check and recheck your answer as soon as you've finished it.